The cell smelled like recycled air and regret. Kalen Rowe leaned against the wall, chewing the same piece of stim gum he'd been working on for 3 hours, mostly because he was too stubborn to let it win. The woman on the other side of the force field sat with her legs crossed and her back straight, staring at him as if he were a puzzle she didn't particularly enjoy solving. "Right," Kalen said, voice echoing just slightly in the cold sterility of the brig. "So let's try this again. Name, origin, rank, any allergies, particularly to sarcasm. I've been told it can be deadly." She didn't answer. She hadn't the last 6 times either. Kalen squinted at the datapad in his hand. "You know, it'd help if I had something to go on. You're listed as unidentified female combatant, humanoid, ears, unusually long. I mean, no offense, but that's a weird footnote to be the only known fact about you." Still no answer. She just watched him with those sharp gray eyes, the kind that looked like they were judging not only you but your ancestors, your breakfast choices, and your socks. "I'm going to call you Queenie," he said eventually. "Not because I think you are one, mind you, but because the way you sit there, all dignified and silent, makes me feel like I'm about to be knighted or executed. Could go either way, really." A flicker, barely perceptible, a twitch of her eyebrow, the ghost of a smirk. Kalen grinned like he'd just won a game of poker with a blindfold on. "Oh ho," he said. "Was that a reaction? I'm making progress. Next stop, small talk. You like terrible coffee? Because that's the ship's specialty." She finally spoke, voice cool and measured, laced with an accent he couldn't quite place. Maybe deep space colonial, or something more exotic. "Your mouth moves more than your weapon hand. That explains why you're still alive." Kalen put a hand over his heart. "An insult. I'm touched. And worried. Mostly touched, though." She leaned forward slightly and, for the first time, he noticed the slight shimmer of circuitry beneath her collarbone. A subdermal implant, half buried in pale skin. Not a standard prisoner tag. Definitely not human. "I'm guessing that's not a fashion statement," he said, nodding toward it. She tilted her head. "And I'm guessing you're not the ship's brightest mind." "Brightest number, but I do hold the ship record for consecutive rejections from engineering officer Marla Wren." "I see," she said flatly. "So you're persistent and deeply unqualified." "And charming," he added. "Don't forget that part." She looked at him like someone forced to eat soup with a fork. The ship thrummed faintly, a low vibration that traveled through the floor and up Kalen's spine. Somewhere above them, the ion drives adjusted, turning the warship slowly away from the asteroid belt they just patrolled. Kalen checked the time. 14 hours since her capture. 14 hours of silence, cryptic looks, and one very unnerving moment where she recited a human poem. He didn't realize anyone had memorized outside of Earth history databases. "Listen," he said, walking over to the force field. "Let's make a deal. You tell me where you're from, and I'll stop calling you Queenie." She blinked once. "You'll never stop calling me that." "Okay, fair, but I'll at least pretend to respect your mysterious and potentially lethal alien heritage." She seemed to consider that. Then, with all the weight of a royal decree, she said, "My name is Alari." Kalen raised an eyebrow. "Just Alari? No last name? No title? No galactic threat warning sticker? That would be redundant." "Of course. Silly me." The datapad in his hand beeped suddenly. He looked down. A low-frequency scan had just finished processing. He frowned. "Now that's weird," he muttered. "What is?" "This scanner just flagged your implant. It's not military grade. It's royal. That's restricted tech, only issued to direct heirs of recognized Atraxi dynasties." Alari said nothing. He glanced up at her. "You're royalty." Her eyes gleamed faintly. "And you're observant. We all have our surprises." Kalen laughed, though it came out a little forced. "Great. I've been calling a galactic monarch Queenie all day. This'll look amazing on my next psych evaluation." He tapped his comm. "Hey, Command. Yeah, we've got a slight situation down here. You might want to take a look at this file. It's tagged red level, diplomatic nightmare grade. Bring snacks." The comm went quiet. Kalen didn't move. Alari stood, smooth as a knife sliding free of its sheath. Even in shackles, she looked like she belonged on a throne made of starlight and steel. "You're not just royalty," he said slowly. You're the royalty, as in the Atraxi monarch's heir. She nodded. Congratulations. You've successfully identified your hostage's political value. That's not going to make this better. Number. But it does make it fun. He stared at her, trying to decide if this was the part of the story where he got promoted or vaporized. When Command finally responded, it wasn't with orders. It was silence. The kind of silence that made you think someone on the bridge just dropped their coffee on the console. I should warn you, Allery said, stepping closer to the force field, voice low and almost amused. The last person who tried to detain me ended up apologizing to their grandchildren. That sounds ominously nonspecific. It was. I left them guessing. Kalen folded his arms. You're enjoying this. She smiled, and it wasn't warm. Immensely. Well, he said, trying to ignore the slow, creeping sense of dread building in his stomach, if I'm going to be a footnote in interstellar diplomacy, I might as well get something out of it. And what would that be? He shrugged. You want coffee? She blinked, then said, You're offering coffee to the enemy. Not the enemy, just a really, really high-maintenance guest. She narrowed her eyes. If it's that synthetic sludge from the mess hall, I'll consider it an act of war. Kalen grinned. Don't worry, I know a guy who smuggled real beans from Io. And if he's dead, I know where he buried the stash. Alari tilted her head again, as if seeing something new. You're different from the others. I get that a lot, he said, already keying in a request for a private talk with Command. Usually from ex-girlfriends and bounty hunters. You think jokes will save you? No, Kalen said with a wink, but they'll annoy you long enough for me to think of a plan. The door hissed open with the weary exhale of a ship that had seen too many strange things and wasn't remotely surprised by this one. Kalen stepped into the Command briefing room with the posture of a man who had slept badly and showered in a room where the water had optional gravity. Around the long holotable, the ship's senior officers stared at him like they were trying to decide whether he was a hero, a liability, or just a cosmic accident in motion. Sergeant Rowe, said Commander Drelm, whose forehead veins seemed to have acquired their own rank. Would you like to explain why the Atraxi Empire has just sent us a very polite but extremely firm message asking us to verify the well-being of their heir apparent? Kalen took a slow breath. Sure. Do you want the short version, the long version, or the emotionally repressed version with bonus sarcasm? The silence answered for them. Right, Kalen said. Well, good news. She's not dead. She's also very much not interested in being rescued. She's been sitting in the brig, sipping my stolen contraband coffee, asking for classical human literature, and insulting the entire concept of gravity boots. She asked for literature? Lieutenant Hera frowned. She started with Shakespeare, Kalen said, then pivoted to someone named Chuck Tingle. I don't want to talk about it. There was a brief, loaded pause. I do, muttered someone in the back, barely audible. Drelm rubbed his temples. You're telling me the future queen of the Atraxi Empire, an empire we have a barely functional non-aggression pact with, has requested asylum aboard a human warship. Kalen gave a small, not entirely reassuring shrug. She hasn't said the word asylum yet, but she hasn't not said it either. She also mentioned the term strategic patience, which I'm pretty sure is royal speak for, I'm not done messing with you. She's playing games, Drum said flatly. Maybe. Or maybe she's running from something, and this was the only ship dumb enough to catch her. The lights dimmed slightly as the room's holotable activated, casting a holographic display of Alari's implant scan. Blue lines shimmered over a three-dimensional model of her spine, converging around the embedded device. This is Atraxi sovereign tech, Hera said, voice low with awe. Custom-coded neural encryption, dual-channel comm suppression, fail-safe detonation protocol. It's only issued to heirs, biologically verified, directly in line for the throne. Kalen rubbed the back of his neck. So, what, we just keep her? Toss her in the break room with a deck of cards and hope the Empire doesn't notice? They already noticed, Drelm snapped. We're being pinged hourly by a cloaked diplomatic courier riding on the edge of sensor range. You know what that means? They're trying to be polite before they kill us? Yes. Well, that's new. Usually they skip straight to the death beams. A soft chime interrupted the meeting. A voice came over the intercom. Commander Prisoner Alari has requested a personal conversation with Sergeant Rowe. She says, and I quote, "He's the only one with the decency to bring proper beverages." Drelm stared at Kalen as though deeply reconsidering the whole concept of enlisted personnel. Kalen smiled. "She likes me." "I'm beginning to see why your transfer requests are always denied," Drelm muttered. Back in the brig, the atmosphere was warmer than it should have been, partly due to the thermal regulator she'd convinced Kalen to adjust. A queen does not freeze, Sergeant, but mostly because Alari had constructed a kind of throne out of her cot, 3 military-grade blankets, and what looked like the remains of a broken mop handle. Kalen walked in holding 2 mugs and a bag of freeze-dried marshmallows. "I come bearing gifts from the distant, sugar-rich world of Cafeteria Prime." Alari arched one long brow. "If you're trying to bribe a future monarch, you'll have to do better than powdered treats. I also brought the last known copy of Space Pilgrims Volume 6, The Betrayal of Bob. It's either a diplomatic marvel or a literary crime." "Both," she said, accepting the mug with a nod. They sat in silence for a moment. She sipped. He sipped. The hum of the ship filled the background. "I know why they're afraid of you," Kalen said eventually. "Only now. You've got a way of looking at people that makes them feel like they're standing naked in a court of law." She glanced sideways at him. "You're not wrong. You always like Shakespeare?" "I like power hidden in words. Your people understood that once. Before you started naming ships things like Boomstick 2. Kalen grinned. "That was one time, and I had no say in the naming committee." "You're curious," she said, changing the subject as easily as changing clothes. "But you're afraid to ask the real question." "Which is?" "Why I let myself be caught." He hesitated. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." "I'm not sure I ever will be," she said. "But know this, Kalen Rowe. Your people think I'm a prize. My people think I'm a weapon. Neither are correct. You're just a woman with a questionable taste in Earth literature." She smirked. "And you're a soldier with a hero complex you keep disguising with poor jokes." "Rude," he said, raising his mug, "but not inaccurate." Another silence, longer this time. She leaned forward. "I need your help." He blinked. "You realize that's probably the most dangerous sentence anyone's ever said to me?" "Possibly, but it's also the most honest." "Okay," he said slowly. "I'll bite. What do you need?" "Time," she said, "and a way to make it look like I'm still your prisoner. Because if they think I'm escaping, they'll follow. But if they think I'm scheming, they'll watch," Kalen finished, "and maybe hesitate." "Exactly. You sure you're not already queen? Because that was the most terrifyingly strategic thing I've ever heard." She gave him a look. "You're helping me." "I haven't agreed to anything." "You brought marshmallows." "Damn, you're good." "I know," she said, sipping. "Now, let's plan your treason." The first explosion didn't come from outside the ship. That, Kalen later thought, was probably the most telling part. It came from the secondary docking bay, precisely timed to coincide with an unrelated coolant venting operation. Someone had known the schedule. Someone had wanted to make it look like an accident. Someone who hadn't factored in that Alari, heir to a galactic throne, could reroute internal surveillance with nothing but her voice and a raised eyebrow. The klaxons wailed in B-flat. Kalen knew this because Ensign Jerem, who'd been a concert oboist before the draft, had once pointed it out mid-drill, which led to a now legendary court-martial for symphonic misconduct. Kalen ran through the corridor, phaser half-charged, boots echoing against metal as he heard the doors behind him seal in cascading sequence. "Alari!" he shouted into his wristcom. "Please tell me you're not blowing up our ship for dramatic flair." Her voice crackled in reply. "If I wanted drama, Kalen, I'd wear a cape and speak in riddles." "Are you not doing that already?" "Focus," she said. "I've isolated the saboteur. Deck 9. He's transmitting coordinates. My father's fleet is moving in." He skidded around a corner, nearly colliding with a maintenance droid which beeped in a front and made a rude hand gesture using an arm not designed for such things. "Hold on. Your father? You mean the guy with a crown made of starlight who commands fleets that make our dreadnoughts look like flying toasters?" Yes, she said. The one I ran from. Great. Super comforting. How big is the fleet? There was a pause. Kalen. Number nope. Don't you dare do that pause thing. Just big enough, she said gently, to wipe out a dozen ships without aiming. Kalen stopped, leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. And how many of those ships are nearby right now? 7. I hate Thursdays. Deck 9 was chaos. Emergency lights flashed red, and the air smelled like ozone and guilt. A single Atraxi agent in a borrowed human uniform stood by a damaged control panel, fingers dancing over the interface with trained speed. Kalen raised his phaser. Step away from the console, he said, and if you start monologuing, I swear I will shoot you before you finish the word destiny. The agent didn't look up. You're too late, soldier. The Queen returns to her rightful place, whether she wants it or not. Kalen fired. The blast hit the man in the leg, non-lethal but very persuasive. He crumpled with a cry and glared at Kalen. I don't know if you've met her, Kalen said, moving in to secure the control panel, but she's not exactly the kind of gal you shove onto a throne. She's more of a light the throne room on fire and take a walk type. He tapped the console. The transmission was halfway through, but Alari's override code was already in place, flickering in Atraxi glyphs across the interface. Nice try, Kalen said, but she's writing her own ending. They stood together on the viewing deck as the Atraxi fleet arrived, not firing, not retreating, just hovering at the edge of scanner range like a line of glittering teeth. Alari wore the uniform of a standard ship officer, ill-fitting and without rank, and yet somehow more regal than anything she had worn before. I thought they'd force a confrontation, Kalen said, sipping from a thermos that smelled like betrayal and too much caffeine. They still might, she said, but not today. Not while I'm alive. He looked sideways at her. You mean that? I mean they know what I'm capable of, and they know what you're capable of. You've done something no warlord in the sector has ever managed. Brew decent coffee? Make me laugh. Kalen grinned. I'll take it. They watched the fleet a moment longer. Then Alari sighed. I can't hide forever. Eventually I'll have to make a choice. You mean between the crown and the free life? I mean between obedience and meaning. Deep, Kalen said, but I gotta warn you, if you choose the free life, we've got a lot of paperwork and a truly terrible HR department. I've fought empires, she said with a dry smile. I think I can handle human resources. He laughed, then softer. So what now? I stay, for now. I help rebuild the treaty from this side. I learn, I listen. I decide who I want to be without someone else's legacy shadowing every step. And me? You get to write the report, she said. And trust me, no one's going to believe it. In the weeks that followed, Alari became an advisor. Not officially, of course. No one wanted to admit they had a royal fugitive sipping espresso in the command lounge. But her insights shaped protocol, her predictions saved lives, and her insults became legendary. Kalen got promoted. He didn't ask for it, but after single-handedly stopping a diplomatic implosion, even the brass had to acknowledge the man with the snark and the gum had done something remarkable. People changed, not drastically, but subtly. They listened more, argued less. Even Jarom stopped complaining about the pitch of the alarms. And Kalen, he changed too. He no longer saw the galaxy in binaries, enemy and ally, order and chaos. He saw nuance, complexity, a woman who looked human, sounded like a queen, and chose to be something else entirely. One evening, aboard a slowly rotating observation deck above the rings of a gas giant, Kalen found her staring at the stars. You know, he said, handing her a drink, you never really told me why you left. She took the cup, thought for a long moment, then said, because I wanted someone to see me and not my crown. Well, he said, joke's on you. I didn't even see the crown until I checked your file. She laughed. It was small and real. He clinked his cup gently against hers. To treason, poorly made coffee, and very long ears. And to second chances, she added. They drank quietly as the galaxy turned beneath them.